I think one of the first things we always encounter is why even use AI? And actually, over the last few years, we've seen so many issues with the use of AI. So it seems to not pick up on the type of abuse and hate that we want it to, but it also seems to take down legitimate expressions that we do want to leave up. It also seems to be very brittle. It has lots of blind spots. It has lots of biases, so many issues with its performance. It does kind of raise the question, well, why do you even use it? And the answer for that is actually very simple. It's just a question of scale. The sheer volume, complexity, variety of online content that we're seeing means that especially if you want to do proactive monitoring, you just don't have an alternative. I mean, I sometimes say AI is the worst way of moderating platforms apart from all the others that have been tried. Because the alternative at the moment is to have human moderators sitting through and reviewing all of that content, then having to make decisions about it. That's very difficult for them. It inflicts a lot of harm. They're also very inconsistent, and it doesn't scale. So let's say you have an unexpected event, perhaps it's a terrorist attack, and then suddenly the amount of online abuse massively skyrockets. Well, if you've only got 100 moderators, okay, they can each do a bit of overtime, but that's not going to scale to deal with the problem. AI can. So there's a lot of reasons why we use AI, and I think the question now is really not should we use it, but how do we use it, and how do we have the right oversight? And actually, there's very few people in this space who have thought about this seriously or who have been here for more than 5 minutes who think that we should have an AI-only system. That's not really being put forward by anyone. I don't know any platforms who have that or who are moving towards that. I think it's all about a hybrid, flexible approach. I think some of the big challenges that we're going to have to overcome with AI actually relate to freedom of expression and also privacy. So how do we build AI systems that don't harvest more data? For example, one of the big challenges right now is that context is hugely important. So who you are, who you're speaking to, the social setting, the platform setting, these things all make a huge difference. How do I encode that into my AI? Well, do I want to start having an AI which understands the identity of the speaker? Okay, on the one hand, that could make sense if you're talking about, say, use of the M-word. That's incredibly different if you're black compared to if you're white. It just has incredibly different resonance. But do I want my AI now to be able to infer or understand your identity to make a better assessment? I mean, I think the answer is no. So there's some really, really tricky questions that we're going to face if we want AI to be better. And I think we should always be aware that it's not trivial to build good AI, but the really difficult question is what do we want the AI to do? Where do we want to draw the boundaries, say, between hate and not hate, what's permissible and what's not allowed, and how to draw that in a way that's consistent and clear. And then we can go and build AI that reflects that decision boundary. But if we don't know what the decision boundary is, we haven't made that decision, we're never going to have AI that does what we want it to do.
What has your research suggested might be the most effective way of enabling platforms to address? Because I know you propose a lot of questions in your answer there. I'm wondering to what extent you've actually reached any conclusions on the answer. I guess I'm thinking if this legislation creates this overarching duty of care, then AI presumably is going to play some role for tech companies in meeting that duty and obligation. And how do they get the balance between the right use of artificial intelligence and human moderation? And how do we make sure that when that balance isn't right, and therefore they do not get the right outcomes, you can't just hide behind the excuse of it was AI, it wasn't a human error? Like, how do we get that balance right?
Right, I think absolutely we have to treat anyone who uses AI should be responsible for its use. It's no excuse to say, I used the AI and it spat out some magic answer and I'm now just going to accept it. That's not okay. I think one of the key things we can have is user challenges. So users should always be able to challenge any decision that they've been subjected to. The other one is that we want explainable AI. So it's a really big problem right now. And actually, this is true even whether it's a human-led process. If you're on a platform and they kick you off, they often don't tell you why. In some cases, you can probably work out why it is. But in lots of cases, you won't be able to, especially if a mistake has been made and legitimately you can't work out what you've done. They haven't told you what policy you've contravened. They often have a lot of policies, so it's not easy to make sense of it. So unless we can get explainable content moderation, I think it's going to be very hard to enable people to make the challenges to when the system makes mistakes, and that's absolutely key. The other thing is trying to be problem-driven. So rather than saying, right, we want AI because AI is shiny and new and fantastic, it's what's the problem that we're trying to solve, and is AI the best way of doing this? Or is AI just one tool amongst many that we should be using, and we should think very carefully about when we do use it? I think this really also comes down to, which we'll probably get onto separately, is safety by design, and how do we build safe systems, rather than just trying to tack onto the end of it a bit of content moderation that we think will solve all the underlying problems. If we haven't built a good system to begin with, it's not going to do it. It's like putting on a plaster. It's not the right answer.
Okay. So, previous witnesses have suggested a significant proportion of online abuse is posted anonymously, and that being able to post anonymously encourages abusive behaviour. Has anonymity come up as an important factor in your research on the scale of hate speech online?
Anonymity is one of those really difficult issues because I think there's widespread consensus around this that both vulnerable and non-vulnerable people want to be anonymous online, and it's incredibly important that we protect that. So whatever finding we have around the relationship between anonymity and abuse or hate, we have to take into account that anonymity is very important. I think we also heard in the previous session about the Twitter finding around how they defined anonymity, which is, of course, very interesting. I mean, there's a very clear body of research and theory in particular which says that...
Do you mind if I just, on that?
Oh, yeah.
Just that, how do you define anonymity? When you say anonymity is important, do you mean anonymity as in having an account that is not verified in any way or you are untraceable? Or do you mean anonymity as in you can present an argument and people don't necessarily know who you are, but the platform or a third-party provider would be able to trace you if you are being abusive? Have you sort of come to conclusions on those definitions?
Well, yeah, you've taken the word from me, or the word that I was going to use, which is
Okay.
traceability.
Sorry.
So this is the key distinction. Are you anonymous or are you untraceable? And traceability is crucial for security services. So if we want to have security services which can prosecute illegal forms of abuse, then absolutely we need people to be traceable. And that's really, I think, what Twitter was talking about. They're saying, look, we have a way of tracing these people. I mean, and again, not that robust, really, if all you need to do is have an email address and a phone number. As we all know, that's not a big barrier. Anonymity, of course, is slightly different. And if we talk about it in a very technical sense, then there's certain things around how we define anonymity. But I think in a more social sense, we just mean, can you hide who you are online? There's also the issue of people who have pseudonymous accounts. So I'm sort of pretending to be someone else, or it's even perhaps slightly recognized that it's not a completely authentic account. And these are slightly different issues. But there is that body of research that says, yes, anonymity is going to be absolutely crucial because essentially you're no longer responsible for your actions. And when you add to the fact that you're in a computer-mediated environment, so you don't see the immediate effect of whatever you say on the person who's affected by it. So you can be incredibly abusive and you don't see how much it's harming them. You also don't, it's often asynchronous, so you can kind of post it late at night, forget about it, and then that's it, you forget about it. But for the person who's received it, of course, it has a huge impact. So there's a lot of what I would say theory-inspired research which says that this should be the case, and a huge amount of qualitative studies that show this is the case. I have not seen as much quantitative, systematic, longitudinal research which shows that anonymity is the key problem here that we need to solve. It absolutely is part of the problem, but if you're going to say, I think some people present it as the singular issue. If we can just solve anonymity, then we solve online abuse, and I definitely do not see that in the research that we've done. And lots of abuse online can be identified to a person who has to bear the consequences of that, and yet they still do it, and they don't necessarily even see it as abusive. They think they're just letting off steam, or it's valid for them to say something which is hateful and prejudiced. So, yeah, I think maybe this goes against some of the sort of general discourse, which is certainly leaning towards the idea that anonymity is the key problem. We don't see that in all the research we've reviewed, though it certainly is part of the issue. I think the other thing with anonymity is thinking about safe by design systems. So it's absolutely right that people can be anonymous online, and that's really important. But there should also be a way of designing systems so that if I don't want to see content from people who are anonymous, I should have a way of doing that, because that might help me to limit my exposure to not just abusive content, but also disinformation and other forms of harm. I think that's really where the conversation should be heading towards, is how do we have systems that give people that choice and flexibility, rather than trying to be too prescriptive about anonymity as a single issue.
Do you mind if I just follow up on that? So two things. One is when you say people should have the right to be anonymous online, just the counter-argument that many members of the public feel that, they don't have the right to be anonymous walking down the street, they don't have the right to be anonymous in a public meeting voicing an opinion, they don't have the right to be anonymous in a shop if they shout at somebody. And so people would question, why do you have the right to be anonymous online? That's just a question that's been put to us as part of undertaking this inquiry. And the other question I would put is, if there is no research to show that anonymity is the cause, if you like, of all the online abuse, has there been any research to show what is the cause of the predominance of abuse online, which is much more amplified than in the physical world, if you like?
I think I might just want to make a small clarification around. I'm not saying there's no evidence that anonymity is important. I think it's just whether people are overstating the importance of anonymity, and sometimes it is treated as the single factor. And I think that's the thing that I have issue with. I think there is evidence that shows that it's one factor amongst others. I think why anonymity is important, but it can range from people who are dissidents and journalists and who are speaking out politically, and obviously that's incredibly sensitive, especially when you look globally, and that needs to be protected, but all the way through to people who are exploring their identity or searching for a sense of self, and they might get some benefit from anonymity or having pseudonymous accounts as well. So I think there are some very clear motivations for having anonymity protected. In terms of the reasons why we might ask what are the causes of online hate and online abuse, I think Shay said it really well in the previous session, where it is often a continuation of what we see in the offline world. There's a lot of research around how people who say are exposed to, who only really interact with people from their own social group, have a real lack of understanding and contact with people from other groups and can start to develop some very prejudicial and hateful views about them because of that lack of contact and engagement. And that spills over into the online world as well. I think there is also these issues around computer-mediated communications and this sense of separation from the person who bears the brunt of what you say. And there are other factors too, but I think the real challenge that we have here is that social media is changing so rapidly and it's so new that our ability to generate longitudinal, systematic, quantitative research into the causal drivers of this sort of behaviour is very limited. And as we just heard, one of the big challenges is how do you get the right data? All this data is not held by us as researchers, it's held by the platforms. And if we can't access that, it's very, very difficult to say, look, this is the problem, now let's go solve it. We're still just trying to tell you what the problem is. And we won't be able to do that fully until we can get better data. I think it's probably just two final points. I think the first one is that I think the people who are most affected by abuse should be the ones who are having a much bigger voice and a much bigger role in the whole policy discourse and civic discourse around this problem. So I think people who have been affected by it, groups who are more likely to be affected by abuse, they should be centre stage. And I just think that should be key across all of the work we do. Second really is just clarity. There's so much confusion around what do we mean by any of these terms, and the more that we could have precision and clarity around what we mean, so that even if I disagree with your account of abuse, I know what it is and I can challenge it, that would be incredibly helpful. And maybe just one request for this committee is that if you could put any push towards having clearer definitions, having more consensus, more standardisation, that would be a huge help.
Thank you.